Hello, it's the top of the hour, so it's time to start the NETMOD session here in Brisbane and online. I am Lou Berger. We have my co-chair, Kent, sitting at the front table, and with him is Rob Wilton. I think it's outgoing AD, I think is the right term, or was AD until the plenary last night. This is an IETF meeting, which means our rules apply. The rules are covered, our disclosure rules and IPR rules are covered by our best common practice, our note well. You should be familiar with them. If you're not, please visit the link at the bottom of the page. Basically, it says that by participating, you are subjecting and agreeing to the IETF's IPR rules, and that you understand that everything you say and do here becomes part of our permanent record. We also have guidelines with respect to how we interact with each other, and we have a code of conduct that says please treat each other professionally and with respect. We know that sometimes discussions can be heated and engaged. And we want you to be engaged with the topic, but please keep it technical. And remember, these are your colleagues, and please be respectful. For those of you in person, please do join Scan In. This helps us know who's there, which is important. But more important is if you would like to go to the queue and say something, go to the mic and say something. We're using an integrated queue between those people online and remote. And so we ask you to use that, the on-site tool. And for remote participants, please keep your audio and video off unless you're acknowledged by the chair. We know that there's been some challenges with that this meeting, maybe some entertainment because of it, but we prefer to just try to follow our process. We already talked about the queue control. We are also using our note-taking tool to do joint note-taking. I just put it into the link into the chat. Please join it, help us capture any of the discussion. You don't need to capture everything that's said on the presentation or on the slides, just the discussion. And we are hoping for some good discussion during the meeting. Our agenda has changed slightly from what was originally posted. We have done a couple of things. First of all, there's been an addition. That number 10 was a recent addition. It came out of the ops area working group, where this scheduling module has been proposed, and there was a suggestion to bring it into this working group, so it's going to be presented towards the end. The other thing is number 6. The presenters for number 6 had a conflict. They're presenting right now, so we've moved them to the end. This slide gives you a bit of an update of where we are on our documents. If we run through them, you'll see that there's a number that are on the agenda. We're going to hear about them later. We've had some where there's been an update already sent to the list. And I think the only one I really want to point out is ACL extensions, because we had done a last call on it, and there really wasn't great response. And there wasn't a lot of response, positive or negative. So we are going to run a second last call and really ask the working group to take a look at it and to comment. Kent, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to this slide.
No, thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. We've had no liaisons or communications, at least one's not found through easy search. This is our standard working remote slide. I think we're doing well with it, so it's pretty familiar. We do have a little bit of process change. We felt that it's not always clear what's happening with the status of the documents. That when we come up to these cycles, and we have the publication deadline for an update, and we also have a request for status being sent to the list. But we really wanted to have a little clearer policy on what do we do with working group documents at each of these IETFs. And we are asking that at every IETF, we get a status update for every working group document, so we know what has changed and where the open issues are. And we're also asking you to do it at the same time as the internet cutoff date, so that we have adequate time to have discussion before, and if necessary, bring something in so we can have adequate discussion in during the session. This came out of this working group, this idea, and actually a comment from Kent. I chair a couple of other working groups. We like this so much, we're now doing it in those other working groups. Mahesh, our AD is in queue, so please.
Mahesh here. I usually do make it a point to say thanks to Rob for every working group that he's been involved in. So this is me saying thanks from the working group to you for all your years of service.
Thank you.
So a couple of comments. I think on the previous slide where you had the list of drafts, you had syslog struck out. I just wanted to give a quick update. I think that expired because the draft had dependencies on the client server suite of drafts that Kent was working on. And with the latest status on them, most of them in approved status for publication, and the others fairly close to being published, I believe the authors, that is Joe Clark and I, can probably update the syslog draft to revive it. And
Right. I looked at that this morning, and the syslog draft has normative dependencies on cryptotypes and the TLS client server, but only on the client side of it, not the server side of it. So you're good.
okay, all right. So, I didn't realize that. Okay, maybe you can give that status update after this. The other comment is on the planned procedure change in NETMOD in the last slide that you put up, Lou. I really appreciate, and I think as a procedure, I would encourage other working group chairs, whether here, Kent, or Joe, to see if you may want to adopt a similar procedure for your working groups. That of having status update for every working group document. Thank you.
And I'll point out this was actually initiated by a discussion by Kent more than me, but I fully embrace it.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a great idea. We should do that. And in the spirit of that, and though I didn't make the cutoff, because client server had entered last call, there's a -32 now of syslog that is live, and thanks to Med. The reason it's 32 is he found some process issues, so it should be fairly good to go at that point, assuming there's nothing more on the client side.
You're fine.
Hi, Scott Mansfield Erickson. There was a comment about no liaisons, so I put a liaison in the chat window that did come out in December, and it's an advertisement really, because in the ITU we have a group that gets together every month or so to talk about Yang related topics with the ITU, IETF, IEEE, anybody that shows up is welcome to come. So if you're interested in that type of coordination, look at the liaison. If you need any other details, just send me an email. Thanks.
Well, I'm apparently liaison search challenged. I thought we had one, and I went and used the tool and typed in NETMOD. It showed me nothing, so clearly I did something wrong on that tool. So please, thank you for pointing that out. Also, thanks to Mahesh for making me feel foolish and forgetting to thank Rob. I actually meant to do that, and I'll blame the time zone or something, but of course that's not really. I forgot, and I apologize. Rob, it's been great. We really enjoyed working with you, and more than that, we are really looking forward to you being back, so that you could be it, because you have always been a really strong contributor to the group, and we're looking for you to contribute to the group, not as a AID, but as actually technical contributor again. So thank you, and we're definitely not saying goodbye. Okay, with that, let's move on, and I think you're next up.
So this is Scott Mansfield. Oh, do I need that?
And you should stand up here also.
Oh, up here. Oh, sorry.
Oh, Scott, I'm sorry, I forgot. I was thinking that Rob was next, but you're right.
On the X. All right, thank you. So I couldn't have asked for a better segue that I've just received, because Rob's name is on these next two drafts as well as mine, because we're trying to get them to move forward. So I just have a very short presentation. Hopefully won't take up too much time, but I wanted to provide an update on these two drafts. I updated them, and what did I update in them? Well, they were a mess, to be honest. There was lots of things that needed to be cleaned up with editorial issues, and the front page was all messed up, and the diagrams weren't in the proper format, and so I spent some time getting that stuff ready and getting the XML straightened out, and so. But there's been no real technical change to either of these documents for 6 months. So the work that I'm doing in the microwave topology work could use these drafts too. So I think it's time to just get these off our plate, see if we can find some people that are interested in reviewing them and getting them moving again. And then the same thing for the sub-interface VLAN. It was just an editorial pass. And I fixed there was an example where it used a best example, or it used a best draft in an example, but it was normative. So I fixed that. I made it a non-normative, informational reference, and fixed the JSON so that it would actually verify. So those are the things that have happened in those two drafts since the last meeting, and I'd like to get these going. So now that Rob's back, maybe we can find some way to get these things moving again. These I think are from 2017 when they first started. So thanks. That's all I had on these.
So these from when I first came into IETF. So they've been around a while. So one quick question though, is that there was some comments on the list from somebody who wanted to leverage these and extend them.
Yes.
I can't remember what the use case was. But there's a question there: is do we try and include that? Because
that's an excellent question. I think we just take that to the list, not to steal your words, but I think we take that to the list and find out, because the thing that they wanted would make a valid use case and a really good example in the interface extension draft. So that would help also get it moving. I mean, yeah, I keep saying last call, let's do it, right? But I mean, I want it to be technically correct for one thing. And the other thing is, if there's people that are interested in participating now that they've realized that it's there, we have time to put that stuff in. So
Okay,
whatever
good.
you need.
That sort of answers my last question, which was the next step. So
Yeah.
we'll take that question to the list, get it
Yes.
resolved, and then we'll do the last call.
Correct.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it feels like a while since I've last been presenting these sorts of updates and things. But I'm going to get into more details. It's one of the drafts that I've been updating more recently. But I'll note that I've taken these slides from 2019, the first couple of slides, because in some senses, the whole ecosystem hasn't really changed very much from that side. And I'm presenting on behalf of the authors. So just to give a quick overview of the whole space, I think everyone should know this. Everyone who comes to the working group regularly should know this stuff. We've got 5 drafts in terms of solutions, and we have 1 requirements draft. The requirements draft was done ages ago. It sort of sat there, hasn't really changed. Of those 5 drafts, and since you've asked for a status update, effectively what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the first 2, and these are the 2 that we're close to. In fact, they have been last call once, and they've been updated after the last call, and effectively we're going to do another last call on that, I hope. So those 2 drafts will cover in more detail today, and they get the sort of base groundwork of Yang versioning done. And then there's 3 more drafts on top of that that then extend it different ways. The Yang packages is almost like an alternative to Yang library that could be packaged off the box and describe collections of Yang modules together. And then there's 2 ones for doing sort of a Pro Tool selection of how you choose which packages and negotiate when you're connecting to the device. So we've spent some time on both of these, but not over the last cycle. So it's been in several years we haven't really progressed these in much way, as we've been trying to make most progress with the first 2. And then the last one, schema comparison. I can't remember the exact time frame, maybe about 6 months or a year ago. We did look at doing some more work in there. But again, that one I think needs a lot more work. It sort of seemed to go too many different directions. So our current plan is to try and get the first 2 done, last calls, ship those 2, and then we can move on and work through the rest of the other 3.
I should move to the next slide set.
Yes, please. And to Lou's point, I will try and help drive these through. I would like to see them finished as well. Right, so I'm going to give an update on one of these, the Yang module versioning update, and then Joe's going to give an update on the December draft. So, and actually, I'm not too hungover today, which is quite surprising. But thank you last night for everyone who was there. I didn't prepare these slides, so Rashad prepared these slides, so thank you for that. So to give a recap, effectively in 118, we made loads of changes. We had a last call review. I think we moved a slide before that. And lots of comments came back on the sort of complexity of the solution and overall asking us why we were having so much flexibility and whether we could simplify it. So on the back of that, and various polls and discussions and like HedgeDoc polls and things, we hopefully got a better consensus as to what stuff we should try and focus on. And effectively, this draft has gone on a diet. So, so I took some time to go around using the delete key and deleting various sections of things that we thought we could live without at this time to try and get down to the minimum subset that we can agree on, get consensus, and then get it shipped. So I plan to go over what we've deleted quickly and say what's remaining, and then we're done. So the changes we've made, first of all, we've removed revision label and revision label scheme. So if you're familiar with the drafts, they used to be very flexible in terms of how they described how you could do versioning. You could use different schemes. You could come along and use Yang Semver that we defined. You could use Semver. And the idea at the time was to have a base revision label that was agnostic to the scheme that's being used and have that flexibility. But one of the pushbacks was, why do we need to support different revision versioning schemes? And we're adding too much complexity there. So the agreement was to take it out of this draft. We're losing this sort of generic revision label scheme, and we have the Semver draft that we are standardizing separately that's introducing a single scheme that the IETF is going to standardize for versioning Yang modules instead of revision dates. So that's gone. And obviously the revision label scheme as another leaf is no longer required. So that's gone as well. So that's one of the changes. Why am I not moving on?
Try again.
Yes. So number 2. So this was some text added early on when I was trying to simplify how you resolve ambiguous imports. So when you end up importing multiple different versions or revisions of a Yang module, how do you resolve those? And what I was trying to push it towards was to say, I'd like it so if you have any ambiguity between import only and implemented modules, you always choose the implemented module. But actually in 7.9, I still like that. I still think it's a better scheme. The 7.950 does have a solution to this problem, and it says you choose the latest. So even if you import only a later revision, that's effectively the one you resolve to. So the conclusion was we don't need to solve that here. We don't see if it's solve it now. And I think we can push this back to like a Yang next, and maybe in a future version of Yang, maybe we try and refine how this behaves there. So that text is gone, and the text you see here is what was in 7.950. So deleted. Next one. So with the change to how revision labels were being described and losing the sort of abstract behavior of revision labels and going to a version scheme, we came up with the idea that actually you could simplify this minimum import statement that we had before. So if you recall how it used to work, it was quite complex in the sense of it would map your minimum imports, which might be a revision label, down to the actual revision date associated with that, and then it would look through the revision history to find those particular things. And if that particular revision turned up the revision history, it was allowed for the import. But because we now have taken labels out of this, that scheme doesn't really make sense, doesn't work in this document. And hence the solution was we would split the recommended min into two different statements. Recommended min date, which is documented in this one, and then Joe will describe the other one that's in the Sembo draft. So when we move to recommended min date, we can lose the complexity of having to look back through a particular history, and we can do a very simple date comparison. So any date that is older, newer, well, I say newer than the one that you select, will be an acceptable revision to import. And so it becomes a lot easier to implement. You don't need to look through this history, and a lot easier to describe. But this works really well if you are versioning using revision dates and if you're doing the existing Yang process of everything being a linear history, because then it's fine. But if you look at this next slide here, it doesn't work so well when you have a branched history. So there's an example here that you have, I've got with the branched history that's described down there. And if you look at version 2019-04.1, that derives from 2019-02.01. So if you look at this and you do an import from 2019, April the 1st, then both sides of that branches are valid. 2019 the 5th, May the 1st and June the 1st are both valid imports. And that's probably not what you want in this case, because normally if you're trying to say, I want to import April the 1st or later, you're really wanting the ones on that branch. And what this actually comes to is, if you're going to do a non-linear development of Yang modules, you probably don't want to be using revision dates as the way of identifying those. You want to be using version labels and you're doing the import by version label, and that's solved effectively. So that is one gotcha with this system, is it simplifies it, but it's designed to work better with version with just using module dates rather than revision dates rather than using version labels. I'll just say, if anyone's got any questions, you do feel free to come to the mic at any time. So that's a change effectively, and what we regard as a simplification in terms of how we describe the history, and we can remove some text for that. The next one, so we were proposing when we were doing this to have a different format for the file names for Yang modules when they were using a revision label as opposed to using a revision date. And effectively what we were proposing there was to use a hash between the name of the module and the revision label. We struggled to get consensus as to exactly what symbol to use, excuse me, what it should look like and whether it should change at all or use a different symbol. And so our conclusion was we effectively couldn't easily reach consensus. This is not a must-have item that we need to have now, so we'll take this out. And again, we'll defer it to a Yang.next problem to solve. The one thing to say is I do believe that a lot of the vendors have this issue that they're going to want to put revision labels or version labels on their modules. And I suspect that there's going to be a de facto standard that people are going to use this format, would be my guess. There was also a question as to how much, Lou, do you want to take a question now?
I thought it'd be good for you just to state where you ended up in the document, so everyone is clear about and can chime in because of the point you just made. So what does the document say right now in terms of what to use?
The document now says, I think it says nothing about it. I think it's probably the section was deleted and hence it doesn't describe anything to do with how you label these ones with different revision labels, because this document itself doesn't talk about any revision version labels at all.
So I think your statement that we're going to end up with vendors doing different things in a de facto is not really a great place to end up. And I hear you that it's coming from a desire to get the work done. But if what we're doing is causing ourselves problem, it might be worth pushing on this one a little.
Okay.
And that's my opinion as individual, but maybe a little bit is from a chair perspective too, of not wanting to cause problems for industry.
I mean, the other thing we thought about here, it's not really great, was to put this like into an appendix as like, this is how you could do it, but then it's sort of cheating the system, really, I think. So I'm not sure that's a better solution. Maybe we, at last call time, we pull this out again and see if this is something that we want to put back in. I mean, putting the text back in is quite easy, but maybe try and push that a little harder to see if we can get consensus as to whether we want to do this.
And I'd be interested if anyone else in the room would like to comment.
I put it in the chat window. I agree with Lou that I think we probably should try to drive to a consensus, even if it's rough. And
okay.
As one of the companies that actually already uses this notation, I think this would be very, very useful, but 5 years. So unless we can stop the debate with whatever conclusion today, please, let's remove it and leave it later.
So maybe we have one last try on that specific issue on the alias and see if we can get consensus and then move on. And the one thing to say here is when Balazs, because one of the pushbacks on this is it would take a lot of effort to change the tooling. And I think, sorry, let's say Balazs, when Per tried to change the tooling in Pyang, I think it was like a 2-line change or something. It was really minimal to support this. So I don't think there's a big tooling impact.
I know Joe's coming to the microphone, but the timer says you're out of time for this slide. But go ahead and.
Yeah, just a reminder on the time, that was just really there for Rob so he could pace. They have another 20 minutes of
I know, but the screen that Rob gets to see doesn't show him the timer. So I just wanted to let him know.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's fine. We're good. We haven't got that much.
Yeah. I was just going to say, you mentioned the Pyang thing, but likely this would fall in December, the way it's structured now, I think, if we were to put this back in, because there is no overarching revision label.
That's true. Well, yeah, that might also be tricky as well. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Augmentive IETF Yang library. Nothing has changed here effectively. So we are effectively adding a couple of additional bits of metadata into Yang library about the conformance as to whether deprecated nodes are implemented and whether the obsolete nodes are absent. All we've done here is, because of the other stuff we've removed or taken out of the drafts, we renamed that to make it a bit more consistent, because all that's left. So a minor change now becomes IETF Yang status conformance. Few other changes. There was a section about versioning instance data, and the sort of, and it wasn't full consensus. The rough consensus was that this could be deferred, that it wasn't actually adding that much value to this document, and potentially be better in a new version of the instance data document. So that's been taken out. And then there was a contentious description about versioning effectively white space, and saying that we wanted to, if you change the white space, change the document, you would end up publishing a new revision. That caused some grief. So again, we've taken that text out. So it's not in there anymore. So that's all the changes. Everything that's been taken out. So a very quick recap of what is left in the document. So there's the new extension, non-backwards compatible, to document when these non-backwards compatible changes have occurred in the history. We've updated and strengthened the rules in terms of what counts as a backwards compatible or non-backwards compatible change. So that's extending from RFC 7950. There's the new extension recommended min date that I've talked about already. We've got guidelines on how you do management, lifecycle management of Yang modules. And then that's the augmented Yang library that I've talked about. So we've dropped about 25% of the pages. So it's shorter, sharper, and ready to go. And then the next steps was effectively to request another working group last call after IETF 119. So that was what our thinking was in terms of, I think we need to have a quick look at the issue in terms of the module file names. But as Joe says, I think that's going to end up in the Semver document rather than this. And maybe that means if we get to that conclusion, maybe we can last call this one straight away and then move on to the Semver one after that. So that's my update. Is there any questions?
Well, wouldn't you have to modify this document first to make that change that you just spoke of?
No, so that's the point, is because the revision labels have come out of this document, then there's no text referred to about giving an alternative name. It would be in the Yang Semver document that defines the new revision. Okay. The version label would say, and you can call modules this way. Okay. The one thing that's sort of not great with that is that this document was the one that's doing the update of RFC 7950. This is the one that's sort of doing the more the language structurally changes, whereas the Semver draft, I think, was trying to do less of that and more of just doing a revision at the version label, although it has got the import by version in there. So maybe actually that's already balanced anyway.
I see.
And I think we are just sort of where we have to be and move forward.
Okay. Well, we can certainly take it to last call after this meeting. Okay. And see how it goes.
Yep. And I'm done, Joe.
All right.
Yeah, I think the making the change in Semver is completely reasonable, particularly with all the simplifications that you made with taking out the different options. I think that's completely reasonable. I was hoping we could do the last call and the two documents together, just because you might hit other interdependencies like this, and I think it's helpful to. It's helpful, and I'm hopeful that we can bring them together, do them at the same time.
Either's fine with us, I think. As I speak for all the authors, but I think that makes sense. Either way works is okay.
Okay, hi, my name is Joe Clark, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the other part that we've been heavily working on, which is the semantic versioning update for Yang module versioning. Again, on behalf of the authors and contributors who meet regularly to discuss this. So we focus, just like with module versioning, on comments that we got on the list, comments that we got at our last meeting, and we ran a poll. We had a hedge doc where people were able to talk about some of the things that we identified as key issues. So based on all of that, and based on some of the restructuring that Rob just talked about in terms of module versioning, this is where we wound up with the current version of the Semver draft. So one thing to notice is there was version 11 and then 12 around 118, and then it went 13 and then a quick 14. And that was due to some issues with the IANA considerations in 13. But then what we noticed was, with the way that we're doing versioning, and I'll talk a little bit about that, the way we're doing the comparison of versioning with importing, there was some text that needed updating. So after, as of Monday, after the lockdown was lifted, there is a 15 in there. So what we'll talk about here is what's in 15, so that you're not confused if you go and read it. So even though this says look at the diffs from 12 to 14, if you want the full picture of all the restructuring that we did, look at the diffs from 12 to 15. Try there.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
There we go. The first thing we did, as Rob mentioned, we got rid of these multiple revision label schemes. So right now there's no other scheme other than Semver, and more specifically, there is no revision label anymore. We've added, the Semver draft adds an extension for version, and we simplified the name. We simplified the namespace or prefix. We're now YS for Yang Semver. We were YS ver previously in 12. So we're now YS for our prefix, and then the extension is called version. So very simple, YS version. And that will have the Yang semantic versioning in there. The rules around the Yang semantic versioning have not changed. We don't really mention all of that here, but just briefly, you have the major, the minor, the patch, just like you would have in regular old Semver 2.0.0. And then we added these two modifiers for Yang, an underscore compatible and an underscore non-compatible. I won't go through all the rules there, but that part has not changed. So we kind of settled on that a while back, and we're keeping with that. But what we did change, the name of the extension, it's now just version, and the prefix is YS. The big change here is this new extension, recommended min version. As Rob mentioned, we changed just recommended min, which existed prior to the 118 refactoring. We added recommended min date in module versioning and the corresponding recommended min version in SimVer. Recommended min version ties to a specific semantic version. Unlike recommended min date, you can have multiple recommended min versions. So for example, remember Rob's picture, wish I kind of had it here, of the branching. You might want to say that I have a recommended min version of 3.1.0, and because I know I backported some things into another branch, I might have another recommended min version of 2.1.0 as an example. So you can have multiple recommended min versions here, and it will be a logical or, like which one, do any of these match? The other thing is these rules of how recommended min version will be recognized or resolved, so to speak. So let's say you have, in fact, I think I'll do it here on this slide just to give you an idea of the rules. We'll jump back and forth here for a second because they are on two different slides. But let's say you had this is your new import statement. Import example module, YS recommended min version of 3.1.0. So let's say now you're going to say which module, which version of example module that I may have do I actually import? Well, if you have a example module of version 3.1.1, so it has a revision statement and a YS version of 3.1.1, then it would be satisfied by this rule number 1 here, which is it has the same major or minor version number and the same or greater patch number. So in this case, we say we need at least 3.1.0 and we have 3.1.1. Yay, we can do it. So let's say we wanted at least 3.1.0 and we have 3.2.0. Well, we can also do that by rule 2, which is it has the same major version number and a greater minor version number. So it has a greater minor version number. In this case, whatever the patch number is ignored. We can import that. Bullet 3, 4.1.2. This is also valid because this is satisfied by rule number 3, which states that it has a greater, the module in question, because we said, remember, we need at least 3.1.0, but fortunately we've got 4.1.2. So because the major number is different, we can import that. Now let's say we had 3.1.1 compatible. We can accept this because in this case, the major, the minor are the same, the patch is the same or greater, and because the patch is greater, we'll ignore the modifier. That's one of those modifiers compatible. 3.1.2, same way. Once we have a greater patch number, we'll ignore the modifier and we import that. Now, what wouldn't satisfy this is 3.1.0 compatible or 3.1.0 non-compatible, because they have modifiers, but the major, the minor, and the patch version match. Now, how would you, let's say, how would you import? Let's say the recommended, we had a 3.1.1 compatible, and we wanted to make sure we import that, and only that, we would have to say YS recommended min version 3.1.1 compatible. It has to do an exact match to pick up those modifiers, for those modifiers not to be ignored. And this is one of the reasons why we allow for multiple instances of recommended min version, so that we can pick up these special things that may exist, that vendors may do to backport changes into a Yang module, either backwards compatibly or non-backwards compatibly. So we can have multiple recommended min versions, and that's the rules and how those are resolved. What I presented here is slightly different in 14. That's the big change that went into 15 to clarify this. So what I presented here is what you'll see in 15, revision 15 of the draft. The other thing that we had to do, because we pulled out all of the revision label stuff from module versioning, was we had to decide what we wanted to do with the Yang library updates. And we thought the augmentations to Yang library were we augmented in version. We thought that was interesting and useful, so we wanted to keep that. And it made sense now to put that in the Semver draft, because that's now the only place that's talking about this extension to the revision statement, this revision version. So we put the modifications in here. There is another Yang module, so there's now 2 Yang modules in the Semver draft. One is for defining the YS version extension, the pattern for a Yang semantic version, and the recommended min version, and the other is for augmenting our Yang library. So we keep things nice and separate there. And this is the augmentation that you'll get throughout the Yang library. The last thing that we wanted to do, which is kind of when you're looking at the diff, you're like, why is there so many lines changed here? This is the last big set of changes. We wanted to create a very early on in the draft, in both this draft and in module versioning, of what a branched history might look like. Just to set the stage early on that says, this is kind of why we're doing this visually. Why we're doing this, and how a Yang module from a revision standpoint might progress. And you may remember this picture from such presentations as Rob just a few minutes ago. That's his linear or non-linear branched history on the left. Well, maybe you see it there, left and right. There we go. And on the right, you see the corresponding semantic versions. And that gives you kind of an idea of visually why we're doing this, and hopefully will help clarify things for newbies reading this document. Just like Rob had, for those of you who can't wait for the movie, here's the recap of changes that we did in semantic versioning. We pulled out the generic concept of revision label, gave it just a version. We created a corresponding recommended min version that's very similar to recommended min date, but has some notable differences and is useful, as Rob mentioned, when you are dealing with those branched revision histories. We augmented the Yang library here. That augmentation isn't different. We've had that before, but it was in module versioning. Now it's in Semver. We added that clarifying picture, and we made some other edits and fixes based on our own reviews and others who chimed in, and we really do appreciate that. Whew. That is all. Questions?
We have one more slide.
Oh, do I? Next steps. Kind of just trying to shoehorn it in there. Well, the next step was, before this meeting began, to request a new working group last call for this and module versioning. Now it sounds like we're going to go back and put in the file name changes into Semver, into this draft, and see, maybe it does end up being more on the rough side of consensus, but clearly and we already knew this from Balash on calls and others chiming in, that there is some desire to have this file naming convention. So we'll look at that, but we really feel this is very close. We've listened, we've debated, but we think that this combined work is very close. We might just have that one little thing to add back in. Lou. Digital Lou.
Yeah, I'd like to have a moment offline with with Kent and the authors about how to run that. I think we should try to have a very focused consensus call on the list rather than do it as part of the document, and sort of like the questions we had before. And so we can do that quickly and then move quickly to working group last call. If we start pulling it into a document and doing revisions and lots of discussion, it may be that it drags out for another whole cycle, and I don't think we want that. Kent and I, when we're next to each other, it's easy to have like a sidebar on that. We haven't had a chance to do that. So, Kent, if that sounds right to you, we can work offline for that. If you think something different, I'm okay with that too.
Yes, that sounds good. I was going to get in line as well to ask a question, but James is first.
James.
Sure, I had a quick clarifying question. Are we also intending to augment into
module state? Or are we explicitly not planning on doing that? Just because the Yang library one says that people either should or must, I think it's a should or may, also update module state for backwards compatibility.
Yeah, I remember, I think NMOP that came up, and I was hoping no one would ask me the question because I couldn't remember if we did it here, and I don't think we did. That's a good question. That was kind of an open question in, I think it was NMOP or maybe it was NetConf on another draft. It was asked in the vein of how much longer do we have to do these deprecated branches? My personal opinion, I don't care. Let's do it. It's not hard to do, but I don't know that we've addressed it yet.
Okay. So Kent is the contributor, I think. You have 5 minutes or 4.5 left, and kind of want to address the elephant in the room. Rob's presentation seemed to be fairly non-controversial. I would suspect that would get through. There wouldn't be too much pushback from a non-backwards compatibility, we need to wait for Yang next type perspective. This one brings in sort of new concepts, and I'm hoping that you can sort of address that and extend an explanation or some sort of rationale to the working group that would help them bridge that gap, that this isn't going to cause great problems or great trouble to existing mechanisms.
So, okay, so yes, this does introduce, well, both drafts introduce new concepts. The concept of is something backwards compatible or not. That's module versioning. To your point, that is something that probably isn't that controversial. We know that there are non-backwards compatible changes happening, and we want to signal them. We also introduce into that a recommended min version, which changes the import rules, admittedly. For tools that will support that, if I have a module that I could potentially import, and today I just say import this module, it may or may not satisfy the requirements I need. And at some point, my compilation is going to fail, because if the module that's doing the importing has a dependency on a node that does not exist in the module that I have to import, it's going to fail. What we're trying to do is just signal, hey, earlier on in the process, be aware that you need a newer version, a newer revision of this module in order to satisfy that dependency. We aren't really changing that rule in SimVer, in the Yang SimVer draft. What we are doing is binding or attaching a human readable or human kind of parsable label, even though we're dropping the revision label concept, but we're attaching this identifier to a revision that says, if you looked at this quickly, your human brain would see whether or not, if you had two modules of the same name, you would see quickly, is this module compatible based on rules that most of us from a software background might already be familiar with? Is there compatibility issues that I might want to be aware of? So if I have, for example, a version 2.00 version of module foo and a version 3.00 of module foo, I can look, ooh, there's probably changes here, and they may or may not affect me, but I should go and look at that. In terms of the import, in terms of the behavior change, it's similar to what module versioning has, meaning that if I'm saying that I need at least 3.00 of a module to satisfy this import, but you only have version labeled 2.00 or identified by 2.00, you might not be able to import that. And even without that, even if your tools didn't support either recommended min version or recommended min date, you would get a failure at some point anyway if you didn't have the module that satisfied those import requirements. What we're trying to do in both drafts is make it easier for operators, easier for those consuming the modules to know whether or not ahead of time they've got the right they've got the right dependencies in place to be able to handle the work that they need to do. Ultimately, this is going to feed into some of the other work that Rob mentioned in terms of Yang packages to make it easier to group dependent modules together and give them the same version identifier. So we want to reuse, and in fact, you'll read we didn't talk about it here because it's been around for a while, we have this term artifact in the SIMVER draft because we want to be able to reuse that notion of a semantic version in other things that are Yang related, and specifically in this concept of packages. So we think this isn't, we don't think this is dramatically changing the way Yang behaves. We think this is making it easier for those who consume Yang modules to understand how modules interrelate better than they have today with just import or import by a specific revision date.
Just a quick follow-up. Are you saying that it's like an opt-in, and if does the graceful fallback to existing mechanisms?
Yes, in many ways it is, because if your tooling supports these new extensions, then you will attempt to do the right thing, or your tool will be able to say you don't have the module that satisfies this. Whereas if your tooling does not support these extensions, you're free to ignore them. You will ignore them, and later on in the compilation or the operational process, you will get notified that there's an error because, for example, you'll try to use a grouping that doesn't exist. You'll try to refer to a node that doesn't exist. And so we're trying to load the errors up front from a compilation standpoint for the tooling that does, but we don't feel that we're introducing radical new things that will change the ultimate behavior down the road of what one is experiencing when consuming Yang modules.
All right, that sounds good. We have Maria in the queue.
Maria.
Hello, Maria Cizinek. I'd like to ask a concept question. Sorry for jumping into this in the middle because I didn't check on this development recently. I'd like to ask, you are introducing a versioning scheme which is a string which should be parsed somehow by dots, and then you compare the numbers. So it means in a machine readable format where we have possible methods how to encode structured data, you are introducing a string which encodes structured data to be actually compared. I don't see how this aligns with all those principles, but I may be too principled. Thank you.
So we are introducing a string, to your point, that has some semantic meaning to how it's constructed. The string is primarily there to be used by humans for just visual looking at it and saying, yes, there's differences here. We do have a draft that Rob alluded to on tooling where we want to do more of the machine consumption of that string and also the machine consumption of the modules to be able to identify more backwards and non-backwards compatible changes in more of an automated fashion. So the string does have rules to it, and we define the rules here in this draft to be able to say, okay, this is how you parse it, this is how you understand it. But we will have more coming after this initial work for being able to do more machine consumable analysis of both the version and the contents of the Yang modules.
Yeah, the thing is, I am basically thinking whether it makes sense to have like another structure inside a structured language. So, if this is something that aligns with the Yang principles, I am not saying that it's bad, but it just smells for me. But I may be too principled.
We didn't want to make this overly complicated either. And we chose SEMVER because there were already kind of socially agreed upon or industry agreed upon rules. One of the issues we ran into was the SEMVER people did change their rules without changing the version of SEMVER. We mentioned that in the draft, but that's why we kind of anchored there. And we didn't want to create a lot of new concepts that were
specific to Yang. We struggled with the compatible and non-compatible. We ultimately landed on there because we needed some of that branching that Semver really doesn't allow for, or it's ambiguous. So that's the one difference. But ultimately, we wanted something that would be recognizable and wouldn't feel too foreign from people doing, say, software development or people with software experience. And that's why we stuck with more of the simple string versus a more complex structure.
Yeah, okay. I am starting to get it, probably. Thank you.
We have to cut the queue. Thank you, Maria. Please take it to the list.
I was going to only make a very quick comment to say that obviously the regular Semver allows you to have extra bits at the end of it. So it's already effectively a string anyway.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for the update. Ahmed?
All right. Hello, everyone.
Okay, let me pass you slide control. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. So this is I came up with late at night. Just
can you speak a little bit louder, please?
Right. Is it better now?
A little bit louder, please.
All right. Is it better now?
Okay, everyone's be very quiet.
All right. Let me switch off my headphones and maybe it's gonna. Do you hear me now?
Oh, much better. Yes, thank you.
I guess it's not working very well. All right. So let me try. All right. So let me try then to shout a bit more.
No, we hear you fine now. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right. So this is something that came out late at night, just before, close to the cutoff date. So feedback.
Go a little bit closer to the mic.
So feedback is welcome, or free to feel free to throw tomatoes at me. All right. So this is about validating any data in Yang with a context in a Yang library. So looking at RFC 9750, I was checking the any data statement, and it has a few things that are a bit interesting. First, it claims that it can take any data that potentially is modeled as a Yang that is not known at design time, and it allows for external protocols to signal that model later on. Yang data is being used in multiple RFCs, mostly to either accept any input or return any output to the user. So either accepting a subtree filter, for example, or returning the result of this filter back to the user. So what's the problem here we're trying to address? So at the moment, there is not a structured way to validate what is given in as a subtree of any data at the moment. The tools I have looked at, LibYang and ByYang, basically accept anything that is, encoded as Yang without checking if that is valid. It just accepts anything as long as it looks like Yang, so it's okay. So that can create some problems, and we try to address this in this draft. So we made a few assumptions. Is the subtree of any data is always specified in a Yang model? And here RFC 9750 doesn't really specify it, but I think the spirit of it says yes, it is modeled as Yang, though it's not very explicit. And the second obstacle that we have is the subdata, is this tree complete or not? So by complete, I mean, did you take a node from another data, Yang data tree, and you put it there as it is at once as any data, or you just take some parts? And I think because most of these values comes from after a filter, so most of the time it's going to be incomplete. All right, so for the next one, so we made three observations here to come to solution. First, the Yang data encoding, I looked at JSON and XML. CBOR, I haven't checked it thoroughly yet. But most of the time, just looking at the Yang data, you can assume what is the namespace of that module that came from, and what or the name of it in case of JSON. The second observation we make is the Yang library already have this information, so you know what's the namespace, you know what's the name of the module, and what we're trying to propose here is just look it up. So for a parser, need to be able to look up that information and validate the data accordingly when it comes to a subtree filter. So for implementing this, I have looked at only libyang implementation, and what I observed here, I'm showing here example for XML, but the same thing applies for the JSON encoding, is they disable strict parsing while they go through subtree that is for any data. But if you don't disable it, actually it will be able to work and validate this data correctly. So you'll not be able to put anything that is wrong there. This is an early draft, but there is still a couple open questions. The first one I alluded to is the complete versus incomplete Yang data tree. So, how are you going to validate something is incomplete? You need to be able to do a subset selection, and you have to loosen up a bit the rules of Yang. Maybe some people have issues with that as well. The second thing, the library might contain multiple module sets. So which one you want to refer to and use it as your module namespace there. And with that, I'm happy to hear feedback from the group and if this something is interesting for people here.
Alex, you're in the queue.
Yeah, so hi, Ahmed. Thanks for this work. I think this is very interesting work. So what I see within your draft is you have two conditions. The first one is restricting Yang. So I am very supportive of that, stating that any data can be validated using Yang modules. The second one is the open issue that you explained here, complete versus incomplete. Here I am I have some sort of mixed feelings. At what point we are stating within the Yang, within this draft that any data, any data that is within this leaf is valid even if there is a mandatory statement in the Yang, right? Mm-hmm. So here maybe I would suggest to either add the XPath or subtree filter as a parameter of the method to validate that, or even having two flags. I think you proposed them in one of our threads already, that you have one way of validating the data in a complete way and one way on incomplete way, and that way you could still have you are not modifying the Yang validation rules. So that's my take.
Thank you.
And Balaj, I'm sorry, Benoit, while you're stepping to the microphone, there's a question mark as to if it's working, so or speak loudly. Okay.
So Benoit speaking. Hello, Ahmed. So in one of the first slides, you mentioned that any data is used in multiple RFCs. So I know what you're trying to do. You want to validate the content of the push updates. Do you believe that we integrated the content of other any data in those RFCs? So is this just a telemetry issue or something wider to validate any data?
It is to validate any data. I mean, the Yang push definitely is a primary driver for this, but it is to address the problem at its core rather than to have a specific things for Yang push. It might not apply to IETF connectionless OAM because they are already having a solution for Yang mount there. I didn't understand it very well. Maybe other people can comment to it. And for any data structure extension, they say it's encoded as any data, but it's not really any data, so it will not apply there. But for the other RFCs, yes.
Balázs Nangel Eriksson. First to Benoit. In 3GPP, we have situations where you store, let's say, interesting attributes or interesting data, and you don't know in advance which kind set of data that will be. So it's stored, it's not just in notifications. The other is about this complete versus incomplete. To me, that sounds very much like validation on candidate. You don't validate every constraint because, yes, let's say a min elements might be satisfied in the next edit config only. So, yeah.
Jean, you're in the queue.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, just something you might want to add as well is to specify the path of the any data that you want to augment, because basically you might have several any data node in the same module, and in that case you might want to have a mapping from this any data node to the Yang library that you want to use specifically for each point. So you might want to specify that somehow.
To clarify here, so the point is, once the parser get into the subtree that is under any data node, once you read these nodes, you will be able to tell where they came from, and you're going to validate it. So even if you have multiple any data leaves in your module, it actually applies inside each one of them, and you will be able to tell for the subnodes where they came from and be able to validate them. Did I get your point here, or I'm missing something?
I think the point is, if you want to validate, for instance, your any data 1 should contain, I don't know, IETF interfaces, and your any data 2 should contain a Yang library. You want to specify that, so that if you put Yang library in any data 1, you don't have you have an error.
I see. This is where I'm impartial, so this is where I push back. So if we do this, then we kind of restrict the any data, and we kind of change it to be really specific data. So my point was to keep it as open as it is. So I'm not trying to introduce restrictions on what data goes in, but if there is a data that's in, I can validate that it was correct according to a model somewhere.
I think we need to switch to the next presentation. We're definitely over.
Thank you.
So continue the discussion on the list, please.
Just a second.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to talk about this Yang-based time series telemetry that was mentioned back in Prague. There has not been any new release of PowerF or philatelist documents since Prague. But the reason is not that it hasn't happened anything. It has happened too much. So we didn't get things back in readable order before the cutoff date. But there's lots and lots of work going on here, and many extensions and changes are happening. The first couple of slides you may recognize if you remember from Prague. This is about this Yang-based time series telemetry, and I see the green check mark there is on top of the text. That's okay. You have probably seen in recent months and years a lot of graphs that are being produced based on Yang from elements of various kinds, for example, about energy recently. The question is, though, what can you use these graphs for? What do these lines really mean? Is there any way to trace what this data is coming from? Can you compare these numbers between vendors or between operators? Often the graphs look great, but they are difficult to know if you can base real decisions on them, because you don't know exactly what's included and what the precision is and many other things. So we have started to build this philatelist framework, which is a sort of general framework for collecting telemetry data. we have defined something called aggregators, collectors, and providers. And this is based on the idea that we should be able to use this framework together with devices that support Yang-based structures, of course, but also together with data sources that are not Yang, that are not inherently Yang-based or something like that, like from SNMP or Redfish or other kind of sources as well, because we want this to work with existing devices that are out in the field today. And not only some of those devices, but all of them. So we have created this Yang modules, philatelist aggregator, collector, provider. The provider part is going on the devices, and the other ones are for the controllers. And I described this in Prague already, and I'm not going to repeat that. But based on questions I got afterwards, it was clear that I was not making my message very, very clear. So I wanted to try to describe the same thing in a different way. So here we have this graph on top. That's the end goal of this exercise. We want to have these graphs. And then that graph is coming from a collection system. I would call it a collection Christmas tree, because it tends to be wider and wider towards the bottom. At the bottom, we have the devices themselves. And we are collecting data from all these devices and storing them in time series databases, then aggregating them together to form, to add more and more aspects of things together, and then getting this few graphs on top. And if you zoom in on this near the top, you'd see that the first thing that we're interested in on the top here is that we want to know exactly what we are measuring, what are the units, what things are in scope for this particular line here, what did we include there, for example, which parts of the network are included, but also specifically like is cooling included here, is the embedded carbon for these devices included here, what's the precision, and other sorts of metadata. And then you would, all the rest of the tree is based on configuration that somebody would write. The operator of this network will have to create this Christmas tree in form of configuration. We're not hard coding anything in the Yang when it comes to the structure of the collection. You would have to say that, yeah, the top telemetry flow here is, the units is CO2 equivalents per hour, and it's collecting from this. And the way that you are combining these data sources is by using linear interpolation and multiplication. The whole point with doing this as configuration is that it should be possible to dump this whole collection configuration tree to somebody who wants to inspect what do these numbers mean. And then you should be able to tell what is actually being collected here. It should be transparent. Because today there's lots and lots of systems that produce graphs, but you don't know what they mean, because the way that things are collected is opaque in code somewhere. And even the people presenting the graph typically don't know what was happening on the way. But by doing this by configuration, we get flexibility as well as transparency. And that's a key point for this. And if you drill down a little bit further, you can see that you get into when you get down to the bottom and want to collect data from actual devices, you can see that here's where you configure which protocols to use, like Redfish, polling, with the intervals, and which paths to actually go and query. And those paths could be Redfish style, they could be SNMP, they could be Yang-based, they could be really anything. And that's key, because you want to include everything in the network, or potentially at least allow for everything in the network. And lots of things in the network don't have Yang push. And many of the things that you will collect data from also as data sources that don't exist really. So you will have to compensate for that by using files or other things like this. Here, for example, we have a case where the data that you read from a particular device, the data is not accurate. So you need to put on what we call the glasses that compensate for those incorrect metrics. There's a file that has a correction value for all the red values here. that is applied near the bottom there. And then at the bottom also we have this Yang mapping to time series database format, where we describe a particular way how to map Yang in model data. And that's true. If you have, even if you're reading something from SNMP or Redfish or whatever it is, we want to have a Yang description of that data. So whoever is doing this collection mechanism will have to provide a Yang model for that data that we are collecting, not for everything on that cooling or server or whatever it is. And this is our strategy here is twofold. We want to work on the controller side with all the existing devices that are out there in the network today, hiding metadata and allowing also to control power draw and stuff like that, go to low power modes and things like this. But we also want to work on devices that are new. I mean, things that are starting to be developed now. We are proposing some Yang models for what is a good device, good behavior should be. Some Yang models for providing standardized forms of data when it comes to energy management, for example. So that's, but we can't wait for those standards here for the device level to be standardized and then implemented and then deployed in the field and then widely deployed in the field before we start doing this. That's why we have this twofold strategy here. And with that, I'm done.
We have time for one very brief question, and then we can switch while we're switching over to the next one. Go ahead.
Thomas Graf. Hi, Jan. I only have one question and one remark. The document right now is a standard track document. Shouldn't that be an informational, or do you intend to develop any protocols in this context?
If you include Yang models as protocols, then definitely yes.
Okay, because I was thinking right now we have an NMOD working group, and I have a similar kind of a document, but I've been choosing like an informational document, and out of that, basically the protocol changes or Yang modules are then going into like netconf or NETMOD. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, maybe somebody who understands how you develop Yang models in information models can explain that to me, and we can think about it. But this is how I understood the process is right now.
Again, another good list discussion. We need to keep moving.
Yes, so I have a presentation about this young full embed, which is basically to solve an issue that we had with the data manifest. So I'm presenting here a fictitious use case just for the example, which is basically assume you want to model all your IP addresses in your network. This is actually, in our case, it was not IETF interfaces that we wanted to have. It was we wanted to include the module for young push, because we wanted to have the configuration in the data manifest. And so it's kind of a similar issue where we have a device level model that exists, and we want to reuse it in a network level. So here, basically, we have a list of devices, and each device has an ID, and then under each device, we would like to have, let's say, the full interface module to have basically all the interfaces in the network in a single way. And if we want to do that today in Yang, we can do copy pasting. We can rewrite the IETF interfaces to have the top level node in a grouping, but the issue with that is it breaks all the augments, so we have to rewrite all the augments as well. And there is another way to do that, which is with Yang mount, but then it becomes something dynamic. So to state what there is in Youngmoont, basically there is what is covered in Youngmoont is either implementation time or runtime, which means that to know what you have in your let's say included in a given moon point, you need to have more information that you provide either at implementation time or at runtime. And what we want to do in particular for the data collection manifest is to have a module that is fully defined at design time. So we don't want to have to specify later what is the content that we want to include in the schema tree. And this is also the difference with what Ahmed presented earlier. Here we want to what we want to do is really to have something that is fixed at design time, and we want to be able to specify directly in the Young module what is the part that we include. So this is the proposal that we have. So basically, it would be a new extension. So this is the solution for the problem in the introduction would look like that. So basically, what you would do is that you would import the module that you want to include, and you also the import of the extension. And then you would need to add an any data node. The idea of using the any data is for clients that do not support the extension, they would just see some arbitrary data tree, which means that they don't have to validate it. And then inside this any data, you would use the extension to list all the modules that you want to have and specify the prefix. So for the what it means, it would mean basically the same thing as the young context, but instead of specifying the contents of the moon point using a young library, we would define it directly inside the young module. And it's worth noting that some other schema language have similar feature. For instance, protobuf, OpenAPI, they can do this kind of thing, which means at this point, I want to include the content of another schema. I see that there is a question from Balazs.
Balazs Eriksson, and also speaking as main Yang guy in 3GPP. This will be very interesting for 3GPP Yang models, where we have a basic problem that let's say the root of the Yang models can be either a subnetwork or a managed element. If it's a subnetwork, then everything that's on the managed element has to be put under the subnetwork. And that brings me to the second question. This is a simple case where you just put one Yang module in this any data contents. Usually it's a hierarchy or a tree of Yang modules that would be listed, that would be mounted there. So fixed mounting would be very interesting. I could even get the liaison statement from 3GPP to indicate that interest if needed.
Oh, okay, thank you. So for the hierarchy, you could put, you could have some any data in the module that you mount, and this module could have their own any data. Yeah.
Scott Mansfield, also Ericsson, but different hat. This is solving a problem that we've seen in a liaison from the Broadband Forum. So you seem to have hit on something here that's very necessary and very useful. And if at any point you're ready to, this is to the chairs too, at any point you're ready to send a liaison to try to get some more people to look at this, just let me know, and then we can certainly have a lot of discussion around this one. It's going to be very interesting for other groups that want to do this, because there was a liaison from the Broadband Forum back in July that talked about a scalability issue. And the way that they tried to solve the scalability issue was to take the interfaces module from the IETF, open it up, change it by adding things to the front of the tree, which is exactly what this is doing, but in a standard way. So thanks for the work. Thank you.
Alex?
Yeah, so very interesting work. I kind of have the same comments. I support the way you are doing it. Can you go back one slide? I have a question. So you full embed the full tree for the IETF interfaces, but are you allowed also to just include some only parts of that YAG module, or you are including the full tree?
Okay, so can we go to the next slide, please? So I think this is the point 3 on this one. So thank you for asking the open question. And I think also the previous answer were answering the question 1, so apparently it's useful. So I think this is an extension we consider, yeah. So maybe we'll do it as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, James Cumming, again, very interesting work. I know you have it as an open question in the document, but I just wonder if you'd had any thoughts about how you might deal with leaf refs.
Leaf refs?
Yeah, so basically the idea would be, so for the leaf refs, if it's inside the mounted part, it should be included, but it should stay within that part. So basically, as a separate context, like in Young Mount, with the second point here that we could have the parent nodes mechanism to include extra nodes, and we could envision to have leaf ref also from the module that is mounting the other one, because we have the full information here to refer to a particular node.
Okay, so
and with that, we actually have to go to the list. Sorry, we have we still have a bunch more to get through. Thank you.
Hey, Rob has last comment.
Okay, just a couple of quick comments. One of them is, I think it's worth looking at the Yang packages work, not necessarily because it's only slightly different from this, but that also considers similar sort of thing about doing handling or the mount points and defining the schemas. So in particular, it covered some of the other issues. So I think that has some of the things that might be of interest here. The other thought I have, I don't want to slow this down, is this a too big a change for Yang, and should be considered as part of Yang.next is the other question I have.
I see some heads shaking in the room, but no, Balazs, we don't have time for the conversation. I also wanted to show +1 support for this work, much better than schema mount in my mind. Who's presenting the next? Oh, perfect.
I was just waiting for. Okay, thank you. Well, this is some work that is got started in the, well, we presented it we have presented it a couple of times in the OPSOC area, and it was suggested that could belong better here than in the OPSOC. So I am here to see the opinion of the group and see whether we we can move it forward here or elsewhere. So basically, the goal is about provenance, is about, well, and particularly about data provenance, is how we can keep a documented trail of what has happened with data as it has been aggregated and progressed, stored, etc. And in the case of the Yang environment, and this proposal is about guaranteeing the origin and integrity of Yang datasets. And as you can imagine, the proposal is to do it by mechanisms for digital signature. This was motivated by some discussion I had with, among others, with Jan on another draft on how to provide a manifest declaring the nature of the collected data sets. And well, thinking about it is not only for this kind of manifests. There are many cases in which, well, this could be applicable whenever there is a data intermediary. It's not that you have put data at rest, or whether this is going to be used for AIM, for training of AI systems, or for running whatever the audit threads. The foundations for this, I mean, well, the point is that, well, the current practice, normal thing of how you can guarantee the authenticity and integrity is based on the transport protocol. We are using TLS, you're using SSH, you're using the certificates that are associated there. It's something that you can store and associate, but the capacity of verification of this is limited once you are trying to use the data offline, or you're trying to use an aggregate that is not using the same transport mechanisms. And the idea is in this proposal is to use native support inside Yang, inside the data associated with the data itself, or with metadata that it corresponds to the data, and avoid this kind of transitive trust that they say, I trust you, I trust that you were talking to someone that's authenticated to you, so you trust that other party, and you're telling me that I had to believe that. And supporting something that is important when we're talking about something like aggregating mechanisms like the one Jan was presenting. Jan, not Jan, that is something that is difficult to... The Jan is Czech, or is Jack Lindblad is...
Please, we're running out of time.
Okay. And so and it's based on COSI, that is for concise signing, and using detached payload, so we don't need to provide additionally an envelope. So for that, the proposal is to use COSI signature bitstream based on this and provide this type def that is new one that is on the provenance signature that is and describes how this is this signature is generated. The method comes from the COSI specs, in which the idea is to use the single signature format with a detached payload. The payload that was designed is generated according to certain rules, and in the information, what we're including is the identification of the key for further verification, the serialization methods, and any other parameters associated with the certificate. This is the mechanism as described there for COSI. And once you have the signature generated, what we have been discussing during when we were in OPSOC, where this signature could be associated with the data. So at the end, we ended up with four enclosing methods that can be provided. One is as a leaf element. The second is about part of Yang push. When you're using this in Yang push, those I have termed these as provenance elements because they are associated with the data itself. There are two other enclosing methods in which you associate the signature, the signature strings with metadata. Either when the data is at rest in a Jan data file, and that it would be adding an element for the provenance string, and even and that's something that the last proposal that we got is about including provenance as Jan annotations, a particular case of annotation. These four enclosing methods are described in the draft as well. What all of these methods support is recursion. That is important when you have aggregated and you have, as I said, several different sources and you are combining them into lists or whatever for storing the data or processing the data. And what is described in the draft and here is that each one of the methods support in each combination this kind of recursion. So you can have a sign for an element, and a sign for a list, or a sign for an upper level aggregate of the data. So right now, as I said, we are on version 2 right now after some discussions inside OPSOC. I'm here because there was this suggestion of bringing this to NETMOD. So whatever the suggestions or whatever the idea, I don't have any kind of problem in bringing this there if the group thinks that it's more adequate here than in OPSOC. And right now we are trying to address the sections that are identified as to be decided to be provided. And we are working in an implementation that is quite promising. We have some results, but not mature enough to be shown. But I hope right now, but I hope to bring an implementation to the coming hackathon and hopefully to report the results there. The results are, well, what that happens, and we have something that demonstrates that this is feasible, that this is doable, and this has a reasonable cost, computational, in size, etc. Well, look for adoption here in OPSOC, whatever, and that's all.
Okay. Yes, Lou, I literally had that poll about to go, but then I heard Diego. It seems like a proof of concept at the moment, and you'll come back and report results, and then we'll see the interest in the room. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
We're
working on it.
Yeah, that's fine. We were gonna just do a quick straw poll to see if there's interest in the room. But if you're still developing the concept, I completely agree with Kent. Let's after when you're ready, come back, give us a report, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Very, very interesting. All right, and Edward. Oh, you're in the room. Very good. Nice to meet you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ed Brain. I co-chair the D10 working group, the meeting of which is happening tomorrow morning, session 1. In that working group, thank you. In that working group, we have we have been doing work on a management architecture relating to some of the management things that we are seeing in mostly space networks. So to that end, there is a document that is going out right now for review called a Delay Tolerant Network Management Architecture that speaks to how we manage devices in certain circumstances that we call challenged environments, and in particularly those that are using and communicating over the bundle protocol that we put out in the D10 working group. When we talk about what a challenged environment means, we sort of look at things like this. We have constraints that are levied by our environment on us. Things like the latencies are significantly longer than things that we're used to caring about in seconds and hours and days. And of course, some of that is simply we don't have line of sight, but some of it is we don't have power or we want things turned off. For that reason, on the top right, there's really no timely end-to-end data exchange, and we don't always assume that we have timely access to infrastructure. On the bottom left, there are asymmetric links that we have to deal with. And the asymmetry is one thing, but also when you have very low links, maybe our management information back is just not something that is allowed to go over the link because the data is more important. I point to a lot of space type examples here because for many of the space agents, they've also said things like bundle protocol is the transport protocol that they want to see end to end. So being able to manage that in these space cases is an important consideration for us in our working group. To that end, when we looked at how most space missions do their autonomous fault management, and this is a claim just based on experience and sampling in the industry, everyone has a roughly similar way of handling fault management on board for space systems. And these are typically stimulus response systems. They are sometimes proprietary. They are typically favor heritage implementations, and they want really deterministic processing. Your billion-dollar asset, if you can't talk to it, you really need to know what it's doing and how it's cascading down a fault tree and into safe modes. But because of that, you wind up with very mission-specific tooling, and they really don't focus on standardizing pieces of this model. And that is, of course, different than perhaps what we see here in the IETF and with our enterprise management systems, where we do have standard models and standard transports and open source tools and very large install bases, but less, not zero, but less focus on command-based open loop control. And so one of the things that we've looked at is how do we take the fault management autonomy best practices from the space system, guide that into operational autonomy that is also flyable on these platforms, and do it in a way that overlaps with the standard models and transports that we are building here. Because as we know, we are starting to see an overlap in space systems and network systems. So to that end, we came up with a generalized autonomy model. And again, the claim here is that if you were to sample the types of organizations that build deep space spacecraft or spacecraft in general, you will see systems that can resolve to something that looks like this, which is typically a rule-based system. There are time rules and state rules. Obviously, time is a kind of state, but it is a specialization and optimization. There is externally sampled data and operators, controls, variables, macros, reports that are generated, and we want to reason about that. But in particular, there are best practices related to if you're doing stimulus response systems, you want N of M evaluations, you want maximum fire counts, you want maximum numbers of evaluations and cooldown periods in between, because this is not just information flow, but of course, things that affect the physical behavior and health of the platform. But also these autonomous systems reason about instances of the data. And when they push out rules and define rules, they say things like, if the data that is fresh and sampled right now has a particular characteristic, then take that data and use it to parameterize an action that is going forward. And so there's a little bit of a mix between the structure of the data and instances that conform to the structure of the data in these systems. And that will become important in a slide or two. And then typically, because these are deployed systems, we go into these cascading rule sets of detect errors or off-nominal conditions in a minor way, try and apply a minor mitigation. If it persists, then apply increasingly greater mitigations. And there are some examples of it. I will skip over these in the interest of time, but this is a fault tree piece from a published piece on the New Horizons spacecraft, which is the thing that went and took pictures of Pluto many years ago. And it's just an example of how you can have a excessive thrusting rule for 33.5 minutes, and how would you detect that, and what is the macro to walk through it. And it is an example of the thinking that people do in fault systems on these platforms. To that end, when we have looked at it, it's how do we migrate that fault management autonomy-like system into operational management autonomy type system for nodes that are running in DTN and challenged environments. We said, well, we still have managed devices and managing devices, and we still have commands and reportings that go back and forth, and we still want pre-shared definitions between them. But there might be a slightly different take on this, which is at the very end, if we have agents that are conforming to this, what we would like to see as encoding the practices that we see in systems today, in these space systems today, is that the management is configuring a local controller on the platform, with the idea that you may have periods of disconnectivity with a remote controller or a remote manager, but you will likely not have those same periods of disconnectivity with your local controller because it is co-resident. In that sense, you build up those stimulus systems and the understanding of the data that you are expecting for them, and then onboard engines, local engines, apply those rules at times when you are disconnected from the remote manager. And architecturally, we have gone down this path because, again, it is the capture of what we see as best practices in a particular domain. And from an architectural viewpoint, we had two questions to this working group as we were asked to come and present it here. And the first question, of course, is this an understood command-based system for these kinds of deployments? Are there any significant concerns about this for network data as opposed to the fault management data, which it is used for? And then the second is, how do we model this in a standard way? For subsequent work here, we have said we want this information modeled in Yang. We have made initial attempts to model this in Yang. We have some part of this as domain-specific language, some with restrict statements. Modeling this in Yang is the right thing to do, but we in the DTN working group are not the experts in Yang. So in a way, I'm here because I am seeking professional help, so such as it is. So with that, that is our overall system and our approach. But we think that we need help in understanding the language or understanding upcoming modifications to the language, or areas where we can come up with domain-specific language to get all of this to work together and get us back to well, I can't go back.
Oh,
That's okay. Getting us back to that Venn diagram of an overlap between space systems and best practices in network management here. So I just want you to be aware of that work, obviously on the D10 working group mailing list, or tomorrow, please come and talk about it, and happy and eager to have any questions or comments here in the minute that we have remaining.
Okay, so go ahead, Mahesh.
Just to reiterate what Ed was talking about, this talk was brought into the NETMOD working group precisely for the reasons that you outlined, is for this group to try to take a look at it from both a language and a protocol perspective to see how Yang or any core or any other protocol could be used to solve the problem. So I would encourage this group to try to take a look at the management architecture. Just a comment on one of the slides, I think, Ed, we had a Venn diagram between the spacecraft management system and the enterprise management system, and seemed to imply there was no overlap between the two. But that's just a side comment.
Oh, we mean to make that bigger. Yes, completely agree.
Okay, so I guess Kent is chair. Very interesting work. The reason why it's here is so that we can see if Yang as is suitable, or if modifications can be made, like a profile of Yang. I think you mentioned some restrictions. So if we carry the conversation forward about what those restrictions are, and maybe we can find a way of making them standard.
We do have right now 2 documents also in the D10 working group that show how we can build and model this system with unrestricted Yang. The question that came up was, are we doing it correctly? So we are of course very open to comment and update and correction of any of that.
Okay, and one thought I had was both RPCs and actions have input and output, but if I understand your DTN, the output, you can't really rely on having output.
Right.
So we would ideally have a way of saying that for those kinds of Yang modules, the output statements are not to be specified.
Yeah, and there's like the restriction clause. There's some way of saying, anyway, not to use fear, but yes,
Okay.
that is the help and additional information we need to understand.
Okay, there's a comment on the list or the chat window about possibly taking this to the Yang doctors list.
Oh, that's a great idea.
And we should keep moving because we have 2 more and not a lot of time. But thanks for that, Ed. I think there's as you're hearing from the group, there's a lot you can leverage here.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Did you steal the clicker? Oh, here it is.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Qiu Fang. So this presentation is about a common Yang data model for scheduling. This is the first time for this work to be presented in NETMOD working group. This is a draft we submitted in the Ops area working group. So just give the document status of this work. This is actually motivated by some other work we did in Ops area working group, which is about the SL extension. And part of that extension is related to the scheduling augmentation to the SL model. For example, to implement an SL policy that takes effect from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So there is some period and recurrence related parameters I defined to augment that SL model, but then it is suggested to move these scheduling parameters into the reusable groupings and then separated from this draft based on the feedback from the working group. And we intended to be common. We intended the definition of scheduling to be common. We align with the representation of period of time and recurrence formats defined in existing RFC. And this is most because we also try to identified some ongoing efforts almost at the same time that are related to the scheduling context. And some of that efforts are from the Ops area working group, and others, one piece of work is from the TVR working group, the time variant routing in routing area. So in the last IETF meeting, the authors of different drafts related to the scheduling, we had a side meeting together to discuss how this draft could be better served as the common building blocks and how the various requirements could be fitted and based on this document. So we updated the draft based on the outcome of that discussion, and we put the update to the TVR working group for their review. We received positive feedback from TVR working group. So now we have 3 users of this scheduling YANG definition now, in addition to the SL extension, we call UCL work we did. And we also have the scheduling OIM tests work in the ops area working group, which is about the network diagnosis using the OIM tests in a precise period of time or based on a recurrence rule. And another is from the TVR schedule YANG draft. They trying to define some scheduled network resources and topologies changes based on a predictable recurrence of some period. And this is the overview of the groupings in our current schedule YANG data modules. I don't have the time to present them one by one, but all of our modules is about the grouping definitions to represent some common scheduling parameters. And this is nothing about the NetConf protocol extension. And for next steps, this work was presented in the ops area working group on Monday this week and requested adoption in there, but per the AD's suggestion, NetMod working group might be more appropriate to discuss this work. So the authors would like to ask is the NetMod interested to adopt this work, or should we proceed our adoption in ops area working group. So now we have a lot of normative dependencies on this work. The SL extension work, we believe now is ready for working group last call, but waits for this draft. And there is also some urgent requirements from TVR working group. So that's it, comments and questions.
Sure. Lou, can you start a show of hands poll for this? And my comment, let me see. This idea has been presented in the past, and the comments that were made then was, why do we need scheduling on the device when controller can always push updated policy configuration to the device on a schedule? And I think the reason why something like this is necessary is for autonomous systems, that you don't necessarily always have the ability. I see Ed, space-based systems. They have to be able to, resolve things themselves. So I do think that something like this is necessary.
And I'm going to do the poll in 2 steps. The first is general interest, and then the other is suitable foundation. I'm personally expecting that there's going to be interest, but not a lot of support for suitable foundation because this was a late edition, and my bet is many haven't read, but I may be wrong.
Joe, do you want to make a comment while we're okay?
Yeah, Joe, definitely come make a comment because this is gonna run for a minute or 2.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
It was mainly Joe Clark as ops area working group co-chair. It was mainly to understand or state that the ACL work is close to last call, and we kind of wanted to get some quick-ish kind of impression of what NetMod might want to do here. And I pulled myself out of the queue because I thought, well, maybe this poll will give me some of that.
So the first one, there was actually quite a bit of interest in this. Almost half the group, who or half of those present, less than half, but almost, were interested in the topic. So that's, I would say, surprising interest, or surprisingly good interest, I should say. And now I'm asking, who thinks that this work is a good foundation if we were going to go adopt it? It's interesting we're getting a fair number of no opinion when really we were looking for yes, no.
Probably varies on who read the draft or not.
Maybe that's it. Maybe no opinion means that they haven't read it yet. For a draft that's a very late addition to the agenda, I think we're actually showing pretty good support. I think we'll talk about it, and Joe, hearing that the ops area really would like to see motion on this probably is a motivation for us doing a quick poll. But Kent and I will talk offline.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
In general, surprising support. Thank you.
And is Tony or Ron here?
Hi, I'm Tony Lee. I've only got 5 minutes. I'm going to talk fast, keep up. I'm working on Yang model for power management. This is to support doing some traffic engineering. And the power PCE that's trying to do power management needs to be able to reach out to devices and understand what power they're using, what components are using power, and then be able to control them, shutting them down when things get unused. All right. So this is what I just said. All right, significant thing here, we see lots of diurnal traffic patterns. Basically, everyone goes to sleep, access networks are unused. We can shut down lots of the network. Our simulations show that we can shut down about 75% of the data plane in large access networks. To do this, we are proposing several things. And by the way, we first proposed this into Ivy. They told us to go away. We were redirected to here and OPSA. And subsequently, we are already going to be redirected to the green BOF. First leaf that I'd like to propose is a used power. And this is part of the component. So this is recursive and can be reported by various different components within a box. This is in watts, which is awkward, but OpenConfig is using this leaf already. And so that's what we're trying to continue with. We wanted to have a knob to be able to turn off particular components. This is a Boolean right now. Many people have already asked me for a slider, and I don't know what that means. When the controller wants to power save something, it only knows one thing: turn it off. Before the controller can turn things off, it needs to know that it can be turned off. So there's a leaf to describe that. And also a leaf to enable or disable automatic power management on the device as a whole. Lots of devices try to do automatic power management already. Specifically, fans are very commonly spun down to match the current temperature inside the box and spun up if required. Sometimes that breaks. And so having a Yang knob to turn that off from the management plane would be very helpful. We have a need for describing functional dependencies. For example, we have switch cards in a box, and line cards depend on switch cards, and there's nothing in Yang that says that so far. We would like to add that, just so we don't accidentally turn off switch cards that look like they are unused. Here's the tree representation. Ron and I are Yang newbies. If we screwed up, please tell us gently. We also would be very helpful to know about traffic. We can modulate how much power a switch fabric uses if we know how much traffic is coming into the box. The controller can tell us exactly how much traffic to expect, and we just need a mechanism to communicate that to the box. So here's what we're proposing. Okay, that's it. Any questions? Thank you.
Whose glasses? Whose glasses? Those are mine. Oh, come on. We rushed through those presentations to give them more time. No comments?
Kent, you were in queue a moment ago. Are you?
I was. Well, I'll just make a comment that Tony, it might interest you. I used to work for Juniper, and 20 years ago filed a patent with Matthew Palmer on power-based routing. And the whole idea was to be able to do routing based on, how green the energy was. So if the data center was powered by solar and it was a sunny day in that area, then, route the traffic that way. Or if it was wind power, then, it was all about how to make the routing as green as possible. Of course, you'd want to do it in layers, right? So that would be kind of an like security layer. It'd be power-based management in layers. So that was my comment. Thank you.
Okay. Mahesh, I just put a comment also in the chat window to say that I believe there's enough interest in the community for because I think this was, as Tony said, presented both in IV and Ops Area Working Group. I believe there's enough interest in the community to have at least a BOF. So I'm hoping that the interested parties will come together to put a BOF proposal for 120.
Yeah, for this chapter, we're definitely interested. Actually, we have seminar idea in IV.
Speak louder.
For this chapter, we are interested. Actually, we have a seminar job in IV. Then actually, I think share some synergy. Just a quick comment, for this component dependency, so if we disable one of the component, do we need to, also disable all the other, dependent, component? So. So this may be too detailed.
As far as I know, there was some workshop in the IETF about energy. It would be very interesting to hear what their comments were and what they proposed for such topics.
Do you know how long ago that workshop was?
A few months ago, I think. Jan Limblad, as far as I know, was there.
I was not invited to that workshop. Sorry, I can't tell you. The dependencies is to prevent you from turning off things that are still in use. So you would not turn off a switch fabric if there are still line cards using it. Any other questions? 3 people still in the queue.
Yeah, it's out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time. Thank you very much. We've made it through all the presentations, and I believe we've had a successful meeting. Lou and I will go over the minutes to review chair actions and act on them as quickly as possible. Lou, do you want to make any concluding remarks?
I was just going to say thank you all for helping make this a successful meeting, and look forward to seeing you at the next IETF.
Perfect. Have a good rest of the day.
So how did it go at getting most of the notes? There's some bits I didn't get, so.
Thank you. You're awesome at that. Yes, hi. Oh, hi. Yeah. You gave that presentation on dots?
Yeah. So I want to talk with you about our job development and extended young development. Although many experts say that we can have a bot, but we do some research and get some feedback from the different areas, and they said this work is too specific, and maybe they don't have any other relevant work about. So we want to just move forward.